Rays of the One Light, commentaries on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita, written by Swami Kriyananda based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. This week's reading is entitled, Who Are True Christians? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. Jesus Christ, in chapter 10 of the Gospel of St. John, said, "All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them." Many Christians, not surprisingly, quote this saying in condemnation of other spiritual teachers, not only the Old Testament prophets, but also Buddha, Krishna, and others who lived before Jesus, as well as, by inference, any who came after him. Yet Jesus himself said in St. Matthew, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Nowhere do we find Jesus condemning or even gently criticizing other spiritual masters. His criticisms were reserved for worldly attitudes and for those hypocritical Pharisees who had allowed religion to become for them a pretense. Yogananda explained that the expression, "all that ever came before me," referred to those spiritual teachers who place their egos and their self-importance ahead of Christ consciousness, in the sense of drawing people's devotion to themselves and not offering it where alone it truly belongs, to God. Yogananda himself was very firm in this regard. For example, he never spoke of anyone as his disciple. Instead, he always insisted they are God's disciples. God is the guru, not I. Ego is a way station on the soul's journey toward enlightenment. The soul is first trapped in lower bodily forms. Slowly, it evolves to the human level, at which point self-consciousness appears. Only in human form can self-consciousness transcend material form altogether, including the lower identity of ego consciousness, and discover the true divine self within. Self-consciousness manifested as ego is an incentive to deliberate self-development. Later in this process of development, however, the ego becomes an obstruction. Inevitably, new spiritual aspirants do not emerge effortlessly from the vortex of ego consciousness. Desire must be offered up resolutely and ever more wholeheartedly at the altar of infinity. It is a gradual process, and few, even among those who seek to help others, are free of ego. If, however, their motive in teaching is not to serve but to be served, they deserve a severe reprimand as Jesus gave them. For their direction of development is no longer upward, but downward. In the name of giving up desires, they are creating new ones. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 3rd chapter, desire obscures even the wisdom of the wise. Their relentless foe it is, a flame never quenched. Intellect, mind, and senses. These combined are referred to as the seat of desire. Desire through them deludes and eclipses the discrimination of the embodied soul. O Arjuna, discipline your senses and Having done so, work to destroy desires, annihilator of wisdom and of self-realization. Give God the credit for everything you do, and see Him as the true doer. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Well, I felt like I was reading through a pillow. I hope you could understand what I was saying. I was really trying to enunciate behind my mask and filter. So I'm going to risk life and limb and take my mask off. And I was thinking in regard to this reading about a song that Swami Kriyananda wrote called More Boxes, No Thank You. And it's a very humorous song, and it talks about the smallness of the ego and how we are boxed in by these concepts, these thoughts of littleness. And the wonderful refrain that is first taken up by the men and then goes to the women in a high descant is I, my, me, mine. It's something that most people in the world are chanting all the time. This is the chant, the song of the ego. What's in it for me? What can I get? What I want? All about ego. And Swami and Master have told us that getting rid of the ego, diffusing that song of I, my, me, mine, that's the essence of the spiritual path. That's what we have to work towards. So we have to recognize whenever that little song comes into our mind of, oh, I did this and I was so good at it. Or I made this meal, or I created this garden, or whatever it is. These are my children. Give it to God. Start every day. God, I want to offer you this day. Work through me. Let me do what you want. Let me attune my will to your will. And in that way, we're happy. It's so lonely being in an ego, thinking, I'm all there is. I have to protect this little body, this little heart. Expand it. Become part of all that is, as the Festival of Light says. See God as the doer. It's a mystery of our teachings. God alone. The quote from the Bhagavad Gita is, relinquish all delusions of personal doership. It's all a delusion. God alone is the doer, the Gita says. So, the ego is one of the thieves and robbers that distracts us from God. The other is desires. We have to annihilate desires. That's one of the reasons that Master was so strong on simple living and high thinking. We have to see when we've had enough. Regulate your senses. There's one of the quote, new yamas and niyamas that Dharmadas found while doing some research, and I've talked a lot about these, so I won't go into it, but one of them is measured diet. I love that. Regulate how much goes into your body. Don't just be indiscriminate, even in food. There's a beautiful painting, you've probably all seen it. It's very famous as a depiction of the Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna, very regal, very incredibly beautiful and radiant, is Arjuna's charioteer. Arjuna represents the devotee, represents us. And Krishna, the great king, the great spiritual master, represents God. And Arjuna has asked that Krishna become his charioteer in this battle of the Bhagavad Gita, the battle of life. And so Krishna takes the reins of the 5 beautiful wild horses that are driving the charioteer, and he becomes the driver. And he has these 5 wild horses, the 5 senses, easily held in one hand, while Arjuna is in the back of the chariot. And this beautiful image is how we can control our senses by asking Krishna to be our charioteer, to control these 5 senses, which are merely instruments of perception. They are not the limits of reality. They are only the instruments that we happen to have in this human instrument. Birds see a great, vast spectrum of color more than we do. Dogs hear better. It goes on and on. But what we need to do is make Krishna our charioteer so that God is in control. We need to surrender and trust God more and more. There's a true story about a very elderly, widowed lady, and she was in India, and she had been abandoned by her family. And how many old people, even in this country, are abandoned by their families. But she had the added trouble that she had a huge tumor festering on her back. No one would come near her. And so she wandered the streets for many days. No food, no water. Finally, just in weakness, she collapsed next to the road. And she was trusting in God, and she was praying to God. And finally she was praying, Lord, just let me die. I'm so miserable. Please take me. And a man came up to her, and he said, there is a place here in Vrindavan that Ananda has, and they will take you, and they will help you. And he summoned one of those little 3-wheelers, those little putt-putts that those of you who have been in India know. They're just little, like tricycles, only they have a gas engine, open air with the driver in the front over one wheel and a seat for passengers in the back. And this man put the woman in the back, and he instructed and paid the driver to take her to Ananda's facility in Vrindavan. And there they gave her water and fed her and bathed her and took her to the hospital that was nearby. They removed the tumor, treated her, and after a few days in the hospital, she came back to live. in this home. And after some time, she noticed a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi. And she told everyone, this is the man who brought me here. So yes, as Dharmadas was saying, we live in very challenging times. And there are wildfires, there are pandemics, there are all sorts of challenges. Do you want me to keep going? Because I'm not done yet. You can have all of next week if you want. But I really wanted to tell you this other story. And in the midst of all the challenges, I want to tell you the story of Eric. Eric is a canary. And he lives in Ananda Minister. And Eric had a very traumatic childhood. He had his own cage, but he lived in a house with many cats. And his cage was on the floor. And so he was continually terrorized by kitties. He was shrunken in on himself. He never sang. He was paralyzed with fear. And then one day, his fortunes changed. And he was, our friend Uma, many of you know Uma. Uma was asked to bird sit for Eric. And that was well over a year ago, and he's never going back to the house with the cats. So Uma is a bit of a bird whisperer, and she started by just putting her hand inside the cage, and little by little, Eric eventually hopped onto her hand. Little by little, he came out of his cage. Bit by bit, he hopped on Uma's shoulder, nestled in her neck. He would sit on her finger. He would sing all day. And Uma said that he has become a bit of a celebrity at Ananda Minister because whenever she has meetings or guests come over to her house, Eric is very sociable, and he likes to come out and sing for people and sit on their finger and nuzzle with them. And she does this thing where she calls it nose cuddles. So she brings him up to her nose and she cuddles his chest with her nose. Eric is only 20 grams, which is less than 3/4 of an ounce. He's just a tiny little thing. And yet, speaking of challenges, Uma told me and sent photos that Eric is molting right now. Now, this happens to canaries every year, and it takes 6 weeks to 12 weeks, up to 3 months, to complete this molting process in which every feather in the body drops out and new ones grow in. I told Uma this reminded me of X-Men. You know, these superheroes with these things that grow out of their bodies. But it's extremely challenging for this little 20-gram being. And Uma said he just sort of sits there all day. It's an incredible effort that his body is going through, growing these new feathers. She sent a picture, and even the tiny little feathers between his eyes, they fell out. There's just red skin, and new feathers are piercing the skin, coming out. She said that his tail has been very scrawny for a long time, but his tail has already grown out, and it's luxurious and beautiful. So the challenge that we go through is part of living in this world. Even this tiny little fluff ball is having these incredible challenges. But little Eric will be beautiful again, and he will sing again. And I just want to close now with another amazing quote that I found. This is from the founder of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid. And he was asked in an interview what he saw for the future of his country. And he said, "My grandfather rode a camel. My father drove a Mercedes, and my son drives a Land Rover. My grandson will probably drive also, but my great-grandson will probably ride a camel." And the interviewer said, "Why is that?" And Sheikh Rashid replied, "There are some perpetual principles that govern everything in life. And to be specific, difficult times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times produce weak men. And weak men create hard times. Many will not understand this, but prosperity produces parasites rather than life fighters." Good advice. Be strong in your courage when others despair, as Swami's song said.
This topic, who are true Christians, is the sort of thing that I used to obsess about as a kid growing up in the Christian tradition, because we had a certain understanding of the way the Bible was to be interpreted, and it was sort of this angst because I knew that there were other traditions, and then there were other spiritual traditions altogether that weren't even Christian, and it just bothered the heck out of me because I wanted to know which one is right. And I love how Swamiji and Christ, Master through Swamiji, is saying it's not about all of those particulars. It's not about, this one is right and that one is wrong. It has much more to do with consciousness, much more to do with the direction of the energy. The other day, Nirmala and I walk at the river down here, and so we usually make a point of, when the air is breathable, we usually make a point of driving to the park there so that we can spend as much time walking out in nature as we can. Well, on that drive down Chase, there near the high school, just a few blocks from here, there's a construction going on in one of the houses. And so the carpenter or whoever it is, the contractor, has this nice truck or SUV and a really, really spiffy trailer behind the truck. One of these walk-in trailers, the whole back tips down so you could roll stuff in, but it's tall enough that you could actually walk into the thing. And just from driving by, I can see the tools that this guy has all neatly organized. Everything fits, it rolls up, it attaches to the walls, it's all, the shelves are all together. And I could tell you from my own experience of building that whatever this guy is doing inside that house, it's going to be good work. You can just see by looking at the tools. He wouldn't put that much energy into the tools if he didn't put that much energy into the work. It's like the two sort of go together. It's just not to say that somebody with an axe and a handsaw couldn't go build a log cabin. I mean, yes, it is theoretically possible to do, but that sort of universal, you can follow the energy and the energy tells you the truth. That's the kind of analysis that Christ is giving. Those who came before me, those who sort of put their ego forward in front of that realization are thieves and robbers because they're stealing what truly belongs to God. We have to learn to follow the script when the script is written by God. I'm going to give you an example of a different script. This comes from the scripture of Star Wars. And it so happened that Harrison Ford was practicing his lines or studying the process, getting ready to film one of these critical scenes where Princess Leia is going to declare her love for him. And he's reading what he has to say in response. And he's not buying it. She's declaring her love and he's supposed to reciprocate, oh, I love you or whatever. And he's like, who wrote this, blankety blank? I can't say this. So when the time comes to film the scene, she declares her love for him. He looks at her and he says, I know, with a sort of a snarky, smile. And the producer, writer, director all kind of went nuts because that was not what the script said. And then they watched the reaction of people who saw it and were like, oh my God, that's making it into the final cut. And it did. And so what he was expressing was actually true to his character. The character would do that. It totally twisted the scene. It totally twisted the energy. We have to learn to follow the true script. And you can only know that script from the inside. It's not something that someone can give you. As long as I'm stuck on Star Trek here for a second, or Star Wars, excuse me. There was a commercial that was just about the cutest thing ever. This little boy, he's about yay tall, 4 or 5 years old, wearing a full Darth Vader suit, like the Halloween costume, but I mean a really, really good one. And he's walking around the house and he's got his hands out like Darth Vader and he's going to make the dog do something. Well, the dog just walks right by him. And he's going to, he's trying to get his little sister's baby doll to levitate. Well, the doll doesn't do anything. He goes to the washing machine, tries to get it. No, just nothing there. He strikes out about 8 times. His dad drives home with a new car, sees the kid, really, very discouraged because his powers are not working. And so the kid notices that there's a new car and he thinks, all right, well, let me just try once. Puts his hands up and then dad clicks the little button and the car boots up, and then the lights flash and the kid's like, oh my God. In the last scene in the commercial, the kid goes to the bedroom and he's got the little doll levitating in the air and he's doing this little it was adorable. Anyway, that was apropos of nothing. However, follow the script of what's actually on the inside. Because I'm reminded of Swami Kriyananda's own life because he had a very different destiny. He had a very different role to play. His brother and sister disciples did not have that job. They were not given the job to go out and go around the planet teaching, to write 140 books, to start a whole series of cooperative communities, etc., etc., etc. To them, that was ego, because they could only see the world through a certain set of eyes, which is perfectly fine, but it wasn't his job. Yogananda gave him a different job to do, a job that he did not gravitate to. It was not automatic. He would have been quite content to be a hermit. Well, that wasn't the job Yogananda gave him to do, to hide in the shadows and be quiet and be in bliss and, just sort of smile all day long. No, he had to go out and challenge himself to relate to people where they were at, to deal with the difficulties of life, the compromises that are inevitably involved in working with people and organizations. Was it always easy or fun? No, it was not. But it was his job to do. Segueing on to what Nirmala was saying about more boxes, no thank you. Swami wrote those songs to help people to understand truth from the inside, to actually sort of feel it. And so that song, very humorously, one of the adorable lines is the beginning of the song, the sailor from England is talking to the foe from a different army, and the reason we win these wars is because we pray. And the other one is saying, well, we also pray. And the Englishman says, but we pray in English. It's like, come on. There was a comic that I saw recently, and there's two armies opposing each other. A red army and a blue army. And this is not politics, by the way. They were just they were colored that way. But you could take it that way if you wanted to. And the one army, the leader is saying to the troops, we're going to win because God is on our side. And okay, you get over to the other side, and the general there is cajoling that we're going to win because God is on our side. And then in the third frame of the comic, you have God with a basket of popcorn going, okay, let's see who's going to win. We're going to check this out. We are not ping pong balls in the match that God is watching. God is for all of us. We have to learn to be for God. That's where the rubber meets the road. God is for all of us. God, in fact, Swami wrote a book called God is for Everyone, and which doesn't just mean everybody is supposed to believe in God. It just means God is actually for everyone, for them, for supporting them. And once we learn that, then a whole new universe opens up. Then it's possible. Then we can receive inspiration from our higher selves in calmness, because we're not obscuring it with all these desires of the ego that say, no, but I have to have it. No. It's, we relax away from. And I'll go off script here for a moment and just say, this pandemic is a really interesting challenge, because even for example, in the Sunday service here, we have to evaluate every single aspect of Sunday service in the light of, first of all, is it going to kill people if we have them sing or talk or respond or chant, blah, blah, blah. It's like, or should we go online? Is it safe enough to be here in the church? It's like it forces us to keep asking questions. It forces us into, what do we actually know? What do we actually realize in ourselves? And those questions are not easy to answer. They have to be asked every day or every week. It's like we have to keep evaluating and reevaluating. Is it a comfortable process? It darn well isn't. It's actually quite uncomfortable, because it's not laid out for us. It's not all in a tin can that we open with a can opener and pour it into the pot and cook it and it's done. It's like we have to make it and think of it and feel it in ourselves. And that's the challenge, but that's the blessing. I'll just close by that those final words of the desire migration, or not, they're not actually the final words. The final words in the chant are, you won't have to fear anything anymore. But I like to end the chant sometimes singing, night and day in thy joy, O my Lord. Because it's very easy to focus on the challenges and the difficulties and all that. But where we're headed is night and day in thy joy. Like the rest of it doesn't matter because night and day in thy joy. And I think that's a wonderful place to end because that's where we're all going to end.